My girlfriend hates it when we take a bath together and I practice skipping rocks. Now she sits down the same end as me. It's not as fun. I was in bed with her the other night, laying there reading my secondhand diary that I bought. You know the pajamas with the feet? I just had the feet. You know when you put a stick in the water and it looks like it's bent, but it really isn't? That's why I don't take baths. So I'm laying there and she says to me, let me ask you this. And I said, what? And she said, if you could know how and when you were going to die, would you want to know? And I said, no. She said, forget it then. So I get out of the bed. I figured I'd go for a walk. She said, how long are you going to be gone? I said, the whole time.
Good morning. It is Thursday, May the 18th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the Star-Spangled Banner, we will have No Free Lunch, The Rape of the Mind, My Take, and You Decide with CNN and Fox on the debt ceiling. All that and more when I come back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing and remove your hats for the national anthem of the United States of America.
Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen.
Regarding the paradox of thrift, there is no paradox here. Keynes is wrong. It is prudent for families facing job loss to put something away. It is also prudent for a society that is overspent and overborrowed to start saving. This is true with or without an economic slump. Hunter Lewis. Ultimately, allowing Keynesianism to get away with the presentation of savings as problematic leads to a continuation of a feedback loop that simply has to be broken. From the outset, the principle of savings and the character trait of thrift should be celebrated. That in an economic downturn, over-indebted societies suffer worse, as such over-indebtedness leads to pulling back on spending even more, may be obvious and even unfortunate. But blaming the problem on the pulling back of spending rather than on the over-indebtedness that caused the downturn and then exacerbated the pullback is like blaming the car for swerving out of the way when there are hazards on the road. Let's remove the hazards and let's fix the road. But the car has to do what the car has to do.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. Who is the true conservative? He is the person that understands that conservatism is not just about politics, but culture as well. He is not selfish, but minds his own business. He acts like an adult. He is patriotic and uses common sense. He expresses what he knows and does so with absolute certainty. He makes judgments, refuses to speculate, speaks clearly and definitively, and is not afraid to say no. He's open-minded, asking why rather than why not. He is consistent, credible, and influential. Not ashamed of his existence, unafraid to learn or correct his mistakes. He's a normal American, and he is better than the socialist. He's a better friend, father, brother, family member, and a better person, period. You have to know that. If you don't know with every fiber of your being that being a true conservative is best, then you're wasting your time. Back in a minute. Thank you. What are the true conservatives' suggested political priorities? Number 1, the abolition of abortion throughout the land. Number 2, make nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons obsolete. Number 3, immediate decertification of all public employee unions. 4, the immediate assignment of criminal and civil liabilities to all government regulators. Number 5, the immediate repeal of the so-called Patriot Act. Number 6, the immediate repeal of all emergency dictator laws. Number 7, the reinstatement of writs of outlawry. 8, government-sponsored recalls, ballot initiatives, and referendums. 9, a flexible minimum wage. 10, means-tested health care. 11, the immediate and permanent prohibition of investment banking by any office holder. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Stuart Varney's My Take.
Since Biden opened the border, an estimated 5 million illegals have come to our country. They are here. They're not going back. They should go to work. Ooh, I understand that is not a popular opinion, but it is reality. Nobody can contest that they are here. Even if you don't watch Fox, you are aware of this disaster. And nobody's going to tell me that we're going to deport millions of people. Come on, get real. They are staying. So what do you do with them? At the moment, they're living in hotels, shelters, tent cities, or the streets. It's costing us billions. We cannot go on like this. We're running out of space and running out of money and patience. What are we going to do? Let them work. Yes, that will encourage more to come. That is the ongoing problem for Biden. If they don't work, are we going to feed, clothe, house, educate, and medicate millions of people with no end in sight? Of course not. But if you can't deport them, what's the choice? Blame Biden for this. He opened the door. He refuses to shut it. The whole country saw this coming, and he did nothing. Look, there is another side to this. America is a very generous place. Trust me on this. I'm an immigrant, and I have felt the warm embrace of this great country. We can embrace some of these newcomers because we have a heart. And we, generous Americans, are confronted by reality. They are here. They're not going back. They're staying. Let them work. Second hour of Varney just getting started.
So that was Stuart Varney. What the big deal with immigration is, where are these people going to go? They're going to go to places where because most of these people don't speak English. So they're going to have to go to communities, find communities where they speak their language. I'm assuming that most of these folks are Spanish-speaking, so they're going to move into Spanish-speaking communities. They're not going to move next door to Stuart Varney. They're not going to move next door to me. They're not going to challenge me for my job, because my job requires fluent English and some more skills than what these people that are coming across the border have. Okay, most of these people that are coming across the border are going to be doing menial labor. The other thing that we got to remember here, they're going to stay, but they're only going to stay until they retire. That's what all they're here for, is the retirement benefits. The people that say, well, we're going to give them pathway to citizenship, they're full of crap. Okay, these folks want to get here, get Social Security, and get a pension. And then when they go back to their home countries, they're going to live big. They're going to live like kings and queens when they get back to Venezuela or Mexico, etc. So that's the reason that they're here. And they're going to put a burden on the Hispanic communities, not English speakers. They're not going to bother with us. They're not moving in next door to me or you. They're going to move in next door to people that are, some of whom may be here legally, and some of them who are here who are illegal immigrants but maybe came years ago. But the point is, those communities are going to get more and more crowded. Those are the folks that are going to have to compete for jobs. The wages in those jobs, whether it's selling flowers on the streets, or doing sheetrock for construction, or doing landscaping work, all those wages are going to be now going down, because the new immigrants are going to come in and they're going to try to undercut the people that are already here. That's where the friction is going to be. That's where the problem is going to be. And so again, I say, if you're a Hispanic American, you're living in the United States today, and you've got these immigrants that are coming to a neighborhood near you, you need to quit the Democrat Party. If you've been voting Democrat, you think you owe the Democrat Party something, you're wrong. You need to vote Republican. We are the party that cares about you more than the Democrats do, because when we have an orderly immigration system where we decide how many people that we need to come into this country to do what, and we give them green cards and they come in, that's much better for you, because you're the one that's going to end up having to suffer the consequences of illegal immigration, which seems to be the policy of the Democrat Party. So again, the issue here, vote Republican. If you're a Democrat, particularly if you're a Hispanic Democrat, vote Republican. Become a Republican. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the rape of the mind.
He takes over. The great group of psychosomatic reactions, although they are no mystery, are more difficult to explain. Let us look at an example which may make this phenomenon more clear. In my hometown in Holland, after a few bombardments during the Second World War, an epidemic of bladder disease broke out. At least that was the first explanation. People suffered from the need to urinate so often that their sleep was disturbed. Almost no one had a full night's rest. For a short time, there was a boom in the practice of urologists. Then psychiatrists were able to explain that this urge to urinate was one of the first reactions to fear. The victims had only to think back to their childhood and to recall their bodily reactions before taking examinations at school to see what was happening. Increased urination may be described as one of the tension-reducing devices of the body. The body may react to danger and panic with a variety of physical symptoms. Perspiration, frequent urination, heart palpitations, diarrhea, high blood pressure are only a few. We know that many of these reactions are related to the body's mobilization of specific defenses against threatening dangers. The specific ways in which bodily diseases related to fear and anxiety develop are conditioned largely by the individual's personal life history, especially his development during childhood. The infant whose early tensions and yearnings were drowned in milk and pablum will grow up into an adult who tries to fill his mouth again as soon as something threatening occurs. Overeating has become, for him, a fear-allaying device. In the process of rearing a child, the parent unwittingly trains certain of the child's organs to react to the tensions of life. Because man has many bodily organs, he can show a tremendous variety in his physical and emotional responses to threats, both from without and within. Psychosomatic medicine distinguishes between different character types in terms of the different organs which respond to outside stress or danger. There is the ulcer type, the asthma type, the colitis type, the heart failure type. Each of these types shows a different reaction to the same battle, the battle against fear. Feelings of social tension may be expressed in various organic diseases. In acute fright, however, certain organs of the body more commonly react than others. As we saw in our earlier example, the need for frequent urination is a nearly universal reaction to fright. The upset stomach is another almost universal fear reaction. During the Second World War, a medical team looked in vain for the bug causing an unknown intestinal disease among American soldiers who were preparing to land on one of the enemy islands in the Pacific. The doctors and biologists searched and searched. They found nothing. The mysterious disease vanished, as suddenly as it had appeared. After the invasion began, and the soldiers were able to discharge in action the tension of waiting for the invasion. These men were not strange or abnormal in any way. Even when one consciously accepts the challenge of danger and is prepared to face it, counterforces in the body may defeat the mental effort. The mind wants to be brave, but the body escapes into disease. Consistency of child rearing, emotional security at home, and lifelong conditioning to acceptance of the various challenges of life, all these are factors that determine how we will react when we are put to the test. In their treatment of panicky soldiers during the last war, psychiatrists gave some of their time to an explanation of these various danger reactions. As the victims began to understand their reactions and saw how common they were, they took the first and most important step toward cure. No longer were they so afraid of their fears. No longer were they in such dread of cowardice. It was important for them to know that what had reduced them to the level of helpless childhood was part of the universal pattern of defensive behavior. As they understood this, they became less afraid and ashamed of their own private fears. They knew that their bodies were reacting like many others, and they became able to once more accept their duties quietly and with better control. Stamina and resourcefulness depend as much on self-knowledge as they do on the help and support we get from others. In times of stress and calamity, people begin to probe for the vulnerable spots and weaknesses in both their friends and their enemies. This testing goes on constantly during a hot war, but it happens during a Cold War as well. The Cold War exerts a continual pressure on human imagination and mental fortitude, and is the cause of many peculiar escape reactions or bodily reactions. Whenever fear and danger confront him, man has to make a choice. Shall he indulge in unchecked fury? Shall he concentrate upon self-protection? Or shall he accept his responsibilities? The fear reactions we've described show how the primordial impulse to self-protection, misguided though it may be, can break through all our civilized defenses. Only training and conscious preparation for danger, both inner and outer, can give a man strength to hold these reactions in check. This training starts within the nucleus of the family and is supported by the example of a peaceful, free community. These are the first teachers in the constant battle between inner fear and outer danger. Those who are in danger of being brainwashed can be helped simply by making them familiar with the facts. Foreknowledge has a partial protective function, and this belongs to the best security we can give to them. It takes away the weakening influence of anxious and mysterious anticipation. With this aid, their mental vulnerability is then furthered by innate inner strength, by the example of good rearing, and by the challenge and opportunity their society gives to them.
And that was The Body Takes Over from The Rape of the Mind by Joost-Meerlo, M.D. Back in a minute. Thank you. So I'm doing another episode of You Decide, and it's going to be CNN and Fox, but this time it's going to be about the debt ceiling. So we'll go first with CNN. It's about 8 minutes long, and here goes.
We begin with the President of the United States. Just moments ago, the President leaving on a critical overseas trip, but a trip he is cutting short because of the looming crisis about the debt here at home. Today, the President says he cut that trip short to be back for the final negotiations on the debt ceiling. Right now, new key negotiators are meeting up on Capitol Hill. And last hour, the President said he is now confident there will be an agreement and that the United States will not default.
America is not a deadbeat nation. We pay our bills. The nation has never defaulted on its debt, and it never will. And we're going to continue these discussions with congressional leaders in the coming days until we reach an agreement.
The House Speaker Kevin McCarthy decided not to let the president have the last word. Just after the president finished speaking, McCarthy says it's about time the president's negotiating.
Now, the president and Leader Schumer have finally backed off their idea that they won't negotiate. They finally backed off the insane, unrational, unsensible idea that you just raise the debt ceiling.
Begin our coverage with CNN's Jeremy Diamond. He's live at the White House for us. So a victory for the process, if you will, Jeremy. Progress on the process. The question is, what about the substance?
That is the big question, John. And to be sure, there are still so many talking points with just 15 days potentially until the United States defaults on its debt, if indeed that June 1st deadline stands. But today, the president expressing confidence that the United States will not default, mainly because he says there's no alternative. The United States can't default on its debt. And he also noted that yesterday we heard several leaders come out and say that all of the leaders, including the Speaker of the House, acknowledged that the consequences of default would indeed be catastrophic. In line with that, President Biden has now elevated these negotiations to 3 senior staff members. The president's counselor, Steve Ricchetti, his director of the Office of Management and Budget, Shalonda Young, as well as the director of Legislative Affairs, Louisa Terrell. On the other side, for Speaker McCarthy, you have Congressman Garrett Graves, as well as the Speaker's senior staff. But the president, nonetheless, in an acknowledgement that this deal is going to come down to him and Kevin McCarthy, cutting that trip short, going only to Japan, not going forward with those stops to Papua New Guinea and Australia. And that's because he wants to be back for the final negotiations, which are expected to happen next week, if indeed a deal is to be had. At the same time, John, as you just heard from the Speaker of the House, he is saying, look, the White House is finally willing to negotiate. They've dropped this pretense that they are not negotiating over the debt. Not quite. Here, if you talk to folks here at the White House, they still insist they are not negotiating over default. Nonetheless, what's clear is that they are negotiating over this spending agreement with that ticking time bomb of the potential for default hanging over them. John?
Jeremy Diamond kicking us off to the White House. Jeremy, thank you. Let's bring the conversation in the room with me to share their reporting and their insights. CNN's Melanie Zanona, Francesca Chambers of USA Today, and Margaret Taleb of Axios. The idea that you're negotiating the budget or the debt, let's just say that's a difference without a distinction, or a distinction without a difference, call it what you will. My question is, Kevin McCarthy gets a big win here on the process. Direct negotiations between the White House team and people he trusts on the White House team and the Speaker's office. The question is, how much wiggle room does Kevin McCarthy have on the substance? Because the House Republicans are not going to get everything they want.
They're not going to get everything they want. Whatever they do come up with, there's going to be a sales job that Kevin McCarthy has to do to his conference. They've been trying to lower the expectation, particularly among conservatives, that what they pass in the House is not going to be the final deal, that they're going to have to be flexible. This is going to take some compromise. You're right that there is a small step forward in terms of process and structure. This is what Kevin McCarthy wanted all along. He wanted it to just be him and President Biden negotiating because he sees Biden as more flexible than some of these other Democratic leaders. And case in point, Biden is still leaving the door open to potentially some form of work requirements, which is something that Democratic leaders are warning against, saying it's a non-starter for them. But Kevin McCarthy feels like he has an upper hand right now and that he can get Biden to a good place.
To that point, the president over the weekend said, hey, I voted for work requirements and welfare reform back in the 80s. The White House said, oh, gosh, and they scrambled to try to quiet progressive complaints. They issued a statement yesterday afternoon saying the president was not going to accept work requirements. Speaker McCarthy says it's a red line. Today, as Melanie notes, the president opened the door, maybe just a little, but he opened it.
I'm not going to accept any work requirements that's going to impact on medical health needs of people. I voted years ago for the work requirements that exist, but it's possible there could be a few others, but not anything of any consequence.
Do we have any definition of what he means there? He said medical, so I assume he means Medicaid.
That's right.
We'll see if that plays out. But a SNAP or food stamps or food assistance, that's another area Republicans are looking for. Is that what the president's opening there, or are we waiting for the White House to clean it up again?
He is not. So a White House official tells me that the president thinks that there could be some possibility in other potential areas, but as he went on to say, nothing of consequence. So SNAP, no. TANF, no. Medicaid, no. He's not willing to go beyond what he already voted for there. Now, one area that the White House is signaling that they could negotiate with Republicans on is those spending caps. They might be willing to agree to a spending cap. Now, the question of that would be for how long? Is this 1 year? Is this 10 years? But that is where you could see some potential movement.
The White House wants it to be 1 or 2 years. Then you get through the next election. They hope they win. They hope the Democrats pick up. This is part of the dance. Everyone's thinking about 2024. But we can go back to just the president's new team. His budget director, Shalonda Young, who has deep experience up on Capitol Hill and deep respect among a lot of the Republicans up there. Steve Ricchetti, I know Steve from the Bill Clinton White House, has been around a long time, and Republicans have been in a lot of negotiations with him. Louisa Terrell is the president's legislative affairs director. Garrett Graves is one of the speaker's most trusted fellow House Republicans there. Let me put it this way. You have adults in the room who know how to negotiate. The question is, why did it take so long? Because everyone was in this dance over whether or not we're going to negotiate?
Yeah, because who's going to blink first?
Yeah.
But look, I mean, there is something that will get everyone across the finish line. For Kevin McCarthy, it's to maintain the speakership. He needs to bring enough of his caucus along that he doesn't lose power. For Joe Biden, it's two things: not to have a default and to get this postponed so this never has to happen again until after the next presidential election. Those two things are a win for Joe Biden. Why does he keep opening the door? Is it just because he's gaffe prone and he can't help himself? I don't think so. It's because we have now 30-some years of polling, but at least 5 or 6 consistent years of immediate polling that show that actually Americans don't think that people should have a free ride, that the way you package this and talk about this matters, and that if, for better or for worse, it's usually for worse, there are two Americas. McCarthy is messaging to different voters than Joe Biden is. And what President Biden, I think, is trying to make clear is he is willing to talk about language that suggests that everybody try to work if they can, but he is not going to leave anyone destitute or uncovered for health care. There is a lot of wordsmithing and rhetoric attached to all of this. But when I heard McConnell and McCarthy say yesterday, nobody wants a default, to me, that says this thing is done and it's just a matter of I think. You have me back here in a week, it'll be wrong and it'll be a catastrophe. Yeah. But I think everyone is trying to get to the finish line with their own audience.
And Biden suggested there could be a deal also. He said that he's looking forward to signing it.
But I think, again, putting that team in the room with somebody McCarthy trusts tells you they very much want to get it done. Yes. The question is, there are some difficulties. Let's move on. Another big thing that's going to happen today, that maybe it affects the mood in Washington, maybe it's just a sideshow, is the Democrats are trying to expel George Santos from the House. That does break sort of precedent in town that normally it is your own party. If you're going to go to an extreme like that, it's your own party does it. The other party shouldn't be kicking out members of the other party. Listen to some of the Democrats, including the Democrats behind this morning, saying, look, George Santos is an embarrassment. He needs to go.
Okay, so that was CNN about the debt ceiling, and now here's Fox.
Welcome back. President Biden announcing plans to cut his G7 trip short as debt ceiling negotiations are showing movement following another meeting with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy yesterday. Here's what Joe Biden had to say about those talks. Watch.
There was an overwhelming consensus, I think, in today's meeting of the congressional leaders that defaulting on the debt is simply not an option. Our economy would fall into recession. It would devastate retirement accounts, increase borrowing costs, and according to Moody's, nearly 8 million Americans would lose their jobs and our international reputation would be damaged in the extreme if we were to let that happen. The country we've never defaulted on our debt, and we never will.
Joining me right now with more on these talks is the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. Speaker McCarthy, great to see you. Thanks so much for being here this morning.
Thank you, Maria. Thanks for having me back on your show.
Can you give us an update on where these talks stand? I know that you have said that the scope has changed and perhaps the staffs are coming up with some common ground. Is that common ground more than just rescinding the COVID-19 unspent money?
Well, Maria, we have to go back to how did we finally get to this place? 104 days ago, I sat with the president and said, let's sit down and let's negotiate. Let's be reasonable, let's be sensible, and let's be responsible about the future, because if our debt gets too large, which it is today, it's 120% of our GDP. It is larger than our economy. In the next 10 years, we'll pay more in interest than we paid in the last 83 years. So this is a serious time, and I want to negotiate. But for 104 days, he would not negotiate, say you just have to raise the debt ceiling, and it was going to put our economy in jeopardy by doing that. Then Republicans passed a bill, a limit, save, grow. Unfortunately, the Senate has taken no action, so we couldn't go to conference. But finally, yesterday, the president finally admitted he would negotiate. He would assign 2 people from his administration to negotiate with us. We started last night. So if we finally have a process, a structure that has worked every time in the past, but now we have a short time frame to get the job done in. So I'm optimistic that now we have a structure that can work. The time frame is what's difficult, but what we really have to do is we've got to spend less than we spent before to curb inflation. We've got to become less dependent on China, make our supply chain better, get more people into the workforce. That's where work requirements moves people out of poverty. We've got to be able to build things in America again. That's where we're going to cut red tape, let projects actually, a permitting process actually work. And there's a lot of places where we need to save money, like COVID money that you appropriated for 2 years and nobody spent.
Right.
That's common sense. Why do we have to fight over that to bring that back to the hardworking taxpayer? That's what's crazy.
But that's not going to move the needle in terms of what you're trying to do, right? That's one item. Are there more items? In other words, do you see common ground on this energy permitting reform, whether it's fossil fuel and green? Do you see common ground on actual caps on future discretionary spending growth? Do you have a sense of that yet?
There has to be caps. Otherwise, we're just growing out of control. Look, we had just started negotiations last night. I now am optimistic because we have a structure that works. Talk to me in a few days to see I'm optimistic about how the negotiations are going.
Well, let me get your take on what the Wall Street Journal is reporting right now, because in an exclusive, the Journal says that the Democrats are about to launch the discharge petition, aiming to force a debt ceiling vote, and that is a clean debt ceiling vote. You've got the House Budget Committee Democrat Brendan Boyle saying we have only 2 weeks to go until we may hit the X date. We must raise the debt ceiling now and avoid economic catastrophe. No more negotiations.
You know what? That's going nowhere, and that really shows that the Democrats aren't serious about doing something. A clean debt ceiling will not pass. The president's admitted it. Schumer has admitted it. That's really trying to give the Democrats something to save face on, but that will never see the light of day.
So you don't think Democrats planning to start collecting signatures this morning for this discharge petition is going anywhere?
No, it's not going to go anywhere. You have to get 218 votes. Look, Republicans sat together. We wanted to work with Democrats. Democrats did not want to work about it, so we passed our own bill that would limit, save, grow. Limit the amount we can continue to spend in the future. Just let the government grow at 1%. Put work requirements in, only for able-bodied people with no dependents. This is something that President Biden voted for as a senator, that President Bill Clinton signed into law. We look at permitting reform to grow our economy. We're looking at areas to the REINS Act to let not the president just go unilaterally working, but have to work with government, Congress and Senate as well. These are all common sense ideas. We're talking about spending where we spent 5 months ago. It's not draconian in any shape or form. These are all common sense ideas, and we passed that bill. The Senate hasn't. The president has no idea. So now we're finally into negotiations after 104 days. And the one thing you know about me, Maria, I never give up.
Right, that's right.
We have the perseverance and the grit, so we're going to sit in the room and we're going to get this done, but we're going to make this economy stronger. We're going to put us on a better path, but this won't solve all of our economic problems. We got to be serious about doing this. Remember, when the debt was only at $14 trillion, the chairman of Joint Chiefs says the greatest threat to America was our debt. Mm-hmm. Now we're over $32 trillion.
Unbelievable.
When is it too much?
Yeah.
When is it too much that we're going to continue to borrow from China to pay people not to work?
Yeah, I understand.
To spend more that we bring in.
But
We've got to stop that behavior.
You've said a couple of times that the Inflation Reduction Act is loaded with too much spending, and the president has said over and over again he's not touching the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, you said a while ago that one of your priorities would be to rescind that money to the IRS. Our viewers want to know, are they going to get audited? Are these people going to get on them, these 30,000 people that the president wants to hire? He wanted 87,000 IRS agents. Are you going to be able to rescind that?
So that's a great question. We already passed the bill to rescind it, but we also put it in this in our debt ceiling bill as well, our limit, save, grow. Because, listen, 87,000 IRS agents is more than double where the IRS agent is today, the number. The government shouldn't be there to go after you. Should they be there to help you? Yeah. So we're looking at ways that we can cut that, save the American money. And the real question here is, Maria, if you look at the 50-year average, the amount of money that we bring into government, normally we bring in about 17% of GDP. We're bringing in 20%. Only 2 times in modern history have we ever met this, in 1944 and 2000. The real question is what we're spending. On a 50-year average, we normally spend 21% of GDP. We're now at 23.6 on our way to 25. It's not a revenue problem. It's a spending problem. Right. So why is your plan to hire more IRS agents to look at every American that spends more than $600 and go after them? So the IRS should be there to help you fill out the tax reform. And the tax reform should be so easy that you don't need an expert to fill it out. Yeah. And we should actually have an economy that's growing, not dependent upon China. And that's what our legislation actually does. And that's what we're working towards.
So you think you're going to have some kind of an agreement within the next couple of days? You said to me a minute ago, talk to me in a few days. You think we'll have this resolved in a few days?
Well, the way I look at it, it still has to pass the House and the Senate. That's going to take a number of days. And that's why the House Republicans acted back in April. That was long before Janet Yellen even told us the deadline was June 1st. Yeah. We didn't want to be in this crunch time. But we're going to do everything we can to get this done. But finally, after 104 days of saying they would not even negotiate this president, I don't want to have a Biden default. I want to make sure America is strong. That's why we raised the debt limit. We passed the bill, and now we're finally in the room where we can negotiate.
Yeah, congratulations on the success you've had. Real quick, I want to get to 2 other topics. I know you've been thinking about ChatGPT a lot, but we're also thinking about the corruption underway. House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan formally requesting Special Counsel John Durham to appear before Congress to discuss the Durham report. So far,
This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. So I'm reminding you that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.